Okay, so I wanted to take it back to the global HMI subcommittee that used to meet in the park, and it was why this is interesting is because the original, this is kind of the meeting that set in stone that the world would go with XML. And until this meeting happened, can you see my screen, guys?
Yeah, we can see it. Looks good.
Okay. So Jerry Yen was there, and Craig Battles, and various other people, including myself and some of the guys. It was, this was a very interesting meeting because we had met every year in Orlando for the Global HMI Subcommittee for a second, and all the people that are involved, happy, etc. And there had been a desire to have a common language on the factory floor because a lot of people had their proprietary ones, everything from LSV2 to Profibus and various other stuff out there that came. Unfortunately, companies would build a protocol and then covet it, and you couldn't gain access. You had to do some drivers. And the Japanese have done this a lot, and other people, it was just a way to do it. And so the idea was, can we come up with an open standard? And what was intriguing about this is that we spent, I think I started going in 1998 or 1997 to this Orlando conference. I was heading out to the founder of Memex at the time, and eventually became a public company called the Manufacturing Networks. But we had just done a big FMS retrofit at Caterpillar, and we had hit our head against the wall trying to get a common language on a Mazak FMS. And so we ended up creating a bunch of tags of things we needed to do FMS work, so remote information. And we made some hardware that sat on the bus of the machine to grab the data and populate it in the background. That's the 11.0 control, which is an 11 for the NFC. And what was intriguing about this is that some of the custom tooling in Caterpillar, making the bulldozers in Peoria, B9, 10, 11, they had custom tooling. So people like Mike Lynch and various other people were involved in this. People that were talking in the late 90s. So what happened? So one of the things that was curious was we had 8 tool offsets per tool, which is unheard of, like a double tool for speed, making the links for the bulldozer tracks. So what happened was the Mazak FMS Haguewire H1000 had Japanese DOS 2.1, and the Mazak guys didn't know how to actually service this very old FMS. So we proposed that we would replace the FMS with our own design. The problem is you have to talk to the machine, and that was complicated because they were kind of controller. It's an issue, it's usual. So it sort of pushed us, like, we need something to talk to machines to do FMS-like technology. So I headed down to the Global HMI Subcommittee. Dick Mathias and Jerry Yen were co-chairs at the time, and it was under ARC. And Rockwell had offered to write something, but we came back a year later and they had done nothing. And we're sitting here saying we really need this. We've got pressing. We need an open standard to make this happen. So one of the guys that worked with me, Dr. Stephen Lane Smith, he proposed the use of XML. And we had a couple of developers that were doing XSLP style sheets and various other things. And it was sort of fortuitous because at the time, people were saying, yes, the web-centric stuff is coming, but, we want to have it fast. We want to have remote monitoring. It's an HMI after all. We want to see the screen updated, et cetera. And I said, no. There's a lot of reasons for doing this. So we proposed an XML schema, an original XML schema for how this would work, and presented it to the Global HMI subcommittee. And eventually they, well, actually pretty quickly, they thought it was a great idea. And we had Osaka, which is the, so we had the people in North America approve it. And then we had, something basic that we had written up. And then the Osaka guys in Europe agreed that it was a good idea. The real holdout were all the manufacturers in Japan, the PAPI group. So with Jerry Yen and various other people, we headed off there and had this big meeting with Professor Takada at Waseda University in Tokyo. And something very interesting happened. I had been to Japan several times because I worked at Facet KK. What happened was we had this basically world conference. And if you notice the people that are on this list, they represent the CTOs or the top engineering people of the various manufacturers like Mitsubishi and Kino and Fanuc and et cetera. So there was a lot of very important people there, like a special group of people that would make a decision about whether the industry in Japan would adopt XML. And interestingly, one of the things that I had been warned of was that everybody would, here we'd come a long distance on our own dime. And my concern was that we wouldn't get a result. We did a lot of platitudes and we wouldn't get a commitment. And it's pretty easy to listen carefully and nod your head and say, yes, we agree, but, and then nothing ever happens. And we wanted to get some action. So what I did in this case with sort of Dr. Lane Smith taking the helm from a technical point of view is that I wrote these minutes while the meeting was going. And we actually got everybody to sign off on these particular minutes before they left the meeting after day 2. And this was really important because it meant that, while people were opening up to the idea of XML as a standard for this type of thing, we went through, they were very, they had a lot of issues and questions and concerns. And this particular document was exactly what was said and how we changed, how we came up with the pieces of what would be involved. And it's really the OMAC HMI API variable definitions. You can see this eventually became MTConnect. And so we put all these things down. We've just done an FMS retrofit, so we knew exactly what we needed to remotely control it. And I basically said, we really, really, really have to get an XML schema acceptance from PAPI, because if that's the case, then the whole world agrees. What was interesting was Dr. Chino was against it, and he wanted to use UML instead of XML. And this led to a very interesting debate. In fact, it was such a debate that the two professors went to the 2 different blackboards and started making use cases with all the Japanese people behind Dr. Chino and all the North Americans behind Dr. Lane Smith. And it was a very interesting debate. Like, we're talking, we had just spent a long time talking about it, their pluses and minuses. And so this is actually what happened on that day. And eventually, and I got to give Dr. Lane Smith some credit, he basically argued for XML, and he got Dr. Chino and the entire PAPI delegation to admit that XML would be the superior choice for a world standard. And it happened right here. And, it was really something. to watch. And we had, at the time, we had the references, we had various protocols that we could see. We explained the resources that we had used, like STEP and various other things. So GM and Boeing basically got behind us and said, we demand to have a common standard. And, you know, even to the point where they had to say, we won't buy any more Japanese machines if you guys don't, you know, that don't get on board with this, because we're tired of proprietary protocols. And that was an amazing day. And it was what, you know, with the standard that had been approved by the OMAC group. And I found out years later when I saw Will Sobel at an INTS that what we had written at the Osaka was actually the root of MTConnect. That's where it started. And you can see very simply all of the pieces. So this document is actually including the whole standard. We wrote this at our company, and we presented it, and it was massaged by the Osaka people and the OMAC people, and then eventually it became this. And that is what everybody signed off in the world on that particular day, that this would be. So this is from an MTConnect historical point of view. Nobody really knows this, but it started on November 7th, 2000. The actual agreement worldwide with everybody in the business was on this day, on the 7th. And this is the document that everybody signed off on to make it happen. And that's why it's particularly interesting to see MTConnect and its growth and its usefulness. It was actually predicted years ahead by the OMAC people, but nobody could come up with the way to do it until our group said, let's go XML. So anyway.
Which for the first 10 plus years of MTConnect was almost certainly the right call, due to the ability to bake that into tools quickly and to actually work with the XML. The thing that's changed now is primarily the acceptance and evolution of UML. So when deciding that a model-based standard as opposed to a text-based standard was necessary, the evaluation was first looking at UML, and then going to some systems engineering people who are at some of the companies that are represented on the list that you have, Tom, and then kind of evaluating what the current state of things was. I would say this was around 2018, so nearly 2 decades later, settling on SysML. And then I think the thing that's been a surprise since the switch to the move over to version 2.0 and going to a model-based approach to MTConnect as opposed to just a pure XML schema has been the number of people who do have an interest in understanding in what's data modeling and why it's useful, how it's meaningful for manufacturers. And the early 2010s questions about why would I want the data in the first place, it went from this idea that you'd have a consistent data model, moved out of R&D and out of the academic sphere, and has actually made traction in the commercial space as well. So thanks for sharing the history. Appreciate that.
There were a lot of people that made it into something great. Really happy with it going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for that. I do go far back with MTConnect, but not that far back. That was enjoyable. Thanks.
We'll have to track down somebody who's got the 1990 version of it too. And then we can have every decade's update point culminating in today. All right, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to start the scheduled sessions demo time. Thanks to TomGaasenbeek from Nexus Networks for diving into history of sort of the beginnings of XML and the debate between UML and XML, predating MTConnect by almost a decade. The MTConnect standard was first released in 2008, and the problem it was solving was to get to a standard data model for industry. Some of the tags you saw in Tom's presentation. The point of MTConnect is primarily to be a domain model for a specific domain. So for manufacturing equipment, manufacturing technology, we're describing a vocabulary and expressing a vocabulary, defining terms, as well as how those terms relate to one another. And I'm going to put this into extremely broad strokes. This will be a review for some people, for a lot of people on the call that they already know all this stuff and they're deep in the weeds. If you're not familiar with data modeling, or if it is intimidating or confusing, I'm trying to put this into plain language for, let's say, executives. So communicating to your bosses, for example. The vocabulary is just telling you what's a thing. So if this is a claw or a hook or I don't know, a crane or an end effector or something like this, the definition can stand on its own, but the context of what that thing is attached to is important. And that's where you get to a semantically defined thing. So if we see the same claw that was hanging from the ceiling, it would be a crane. Put it on the end of a robot arm, and now we can call it an end effector or end of arm tooling or something like that. And that semantic definition is much richer, and it's important for downstream consumption of the data. So knowing that this, the crane did the thing versus the robot did the thing is important, particularly as you get longer and longer and longer, chains of analysis, and as the data gets farther and farther away from the point of origin where that data was generated. So being able to express the semantic relationships and then to carry those semantics that are defined at the source and then pass through to all subsequent users is critical. And that's the intention of MTConnect. So there are, domain modeling is not an MTConnect specific thing. There are all kinds of domain models for building management, for packaging equipment, for all kinds of things under the sun. The scope of MTConnect started primarily as manufacturing technology with a primary focus on machine tools. There's no reason you can't use the techniques and the modeling approach of MTConnect for other equipment, but the most robust piece of the model is still at its core, discrete manufacturing. That's going to include your CNC machine tools, forming and fabricating, industrial lasers, 3D printers, particularly at the industrial scale, that kind of thing. There's some movement into things like heat treat ovens, but think about the equipment you would have on a shop floor for a forming, fabricating, or machining shop, and that's the primary domain. Of course, none of those things exist in a vacuum, so it's important to have a model that is portable and transportable across, plays nicely with other data models. And that's been something that has been a very, very long time coming. And a lot of the intention of moving away from XML and towards a model-based approach to MTConnect is to make it more portable and make it easier to work with across different systems. So at this point, as of version 2.0 of MTConnect, the MTConnect data model is modeled in SysML. SysML is a language for visualizing, representing, and expressing for a computer relationships between terms. So getting that definition and the semantics to it, that is now expressed in SysML, similarly to how for the 10-year history prior to version 2, MTConnect was a model expressed in XML schema combined with additional information that was carried in the spec itself. All of that additional information, as well as the information that was carried in the XML schema, that's now represented fully in SysML, and it will be in the future. And that's useful because it cuts a person out where you no longer have to interpret both an XML schema and additional considerations that are only expressed through the text or diagrams or additional content in the standard. So the intention of UML or SysML or any other industry standard modeling language is to be able to communicate these relationships across the board. That allows all consumers of that data, both people and computer systems, to be able to more easily access, manipulate, and get to the value, which is those semantic definitions. For most users, all of that is a little bit esoteric. The thing that's important to them is that the MTConnect model is being implemented via an agent. Through the 2000s, through the 2010s, there was lots of hope that there would be proliferation of open source tools around manufacturing connectivity and data connectivity for the factory. One of the things that's in the way of that is having additional difficulty in accessing and using the model. We've seen since the version 2.0 release and since the model-based approach, this has led to the beginnings of a proliferation of additional tools. So there is a reference agent written in C++. There are other agents that have been written open sourced or proprietary. Some of that stuff, it predates the modeling effort. Some of it has accelerated with the modeling effort, and some of them are really not an agent, but they're additional functions and features being built out. So it's an exciting time if you like software, and if you've been trying to get more software on the floor in the factory and trying to digitize the factory. This is kind of the crux of a lot of what's going on. Okay, with that as background, here's the agenda. If you have for the rest of the day, if you have a project site account, you can follow along. The issue number is 3017. We're going to start with Sharb, who's going to dig into the SysML model directly. And then we'll talk a lot about MQTT this morning. In the afternoon, we've got digital twin demo updates from Tom Copeland, who presented some of that stuff last time around and has more today. And then the last thing we've got on the agenda for now is going to be TomGaasenbeek presenting his legacy equipment connectivity tools for FANUC with dprint. So revisiting a topic that has indirectly come up before with a much more specific technology there. Sharb, I'm going to make you the presenter if you're ready.
Yes, sir.
I think you should be ready.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, I'll just share the whole screen. I think that might be better. Yeah, let me know when you can see the presentation.
You can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, it's arranging.